Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello, and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 48, and today we are continuing to make our way through The Price of Freedom by A.C. Crispin. This is the third episode covering this book, so if you are somehow listening to this episode without listening to the previous two episodes I did on it, I highly recommend listening to those episodes first, as we have already spent a combined 4 hours covering this book so far. But for a little refresher as to what happened last time, Cutler Beckett and Jack Sparrow made a plan to find Zerzura, and Jack meets Ayisha, who is a slave who is actually Amenirdis, the princess of Zerzura. As part of Jack and Beckett's deal, Jack helps Ayisha escape Calabar, and also frees her guard Taharka, since she would not leave without him. After that, Jack takes them aboard the Wicked Wench, and leaves in the dead of night as planned. So that is where we pick up in this episode. So as I said, the Wicked Wench is sailing away from Calabar. Unfortunately, the wind is against them, so they're moving slower than anticipated. Jack has had their ship's carpenter and carpenter's mate make a temporary cabin below deck for Ayisha and Taharka. It's a small little area with canvas for walls and an unused gun port for a window. And in case you forgot from last time, the carpenter's mate is Samuel Newton, who is the spy that Ian Mercer had planted on the Wicked Wench to keep an eye on Jack for Beckett. But the rest of the crew is not aware of the destination of their voyage. Only Jack, Chamba, and Robbie know of where they're going, and of course Ayisha and Taharka. But a storm is beginning to brew on the horizon, and Jack orders the crew to prepare the wench for it. It goes on for a while, but ultimately it begins to dissipate, and Jack heads to his cabin for a bit of rest, and this is where we flash back to years prior at Shipwreck Cove once again. So the last major thing that happened back here was that we learned Borya Palachnik, who is the pirate lord of the Caspian Sea, was actually one of the rogue pirates. And Davy Jones, yes, Davy Jones, also mentioned that there was another rogue pirate who was skulking around in Shipwreck Cove. But anyway, Jack and Esmeralda are still kind of shaken up from seeing Davy Jones in the flesh, who, if you don't remember, had been summoned by the pirate lords to confirm if Borya was a rogue pirate or not. Both Jack and Esmeralda want to get a drink, so Jack takes her back to Venganza to change before they head up to the drunken lady. They see Steve, but there is no sign of Marie. Esmeralda asks if she's okay, and Steve says she isn't feeling well. Moments after this, Marie emerges from their personal quarters behind the bar, and we see that her eyes are red and swollen, and her face is bruised. She immediately beckons for Esmeralda to come in, and Jack joins her. Marie then tells them that it was Christophe who had tried to violate her. And I will summarize this part kind of quick in case this is a triggering subject for you. Just skip ahead maybe 30 seconds or so. So Marie tells them that Christophe was very drunk and told Marie that it was time to earn the doubloon he had given her. He said that back at the very beginning of the book. He then grabbed her and wouldn't let go. So Marie slapped him, which resulted in Christophe laughing before smacking her back. After that, he grabbed her dress and tried to put his hand somewhere not PG, but she pulled away and was able to get free from him. Thankfully, Steve was on his way back from his errands, and Christophe had run off. After hearing all this, Jack is pretty shaken up as he considers Christophe his friend, or at least he thought he did, as we are learning more and more really bad things about Christophe. Jack tries to think of a way that maybe Christophe didn't have ill intentions, but he is distracted when he sees Marie whispering something to Esmeralda. Jack doesn't understand what they are talking about, but we find out here that Marie is pregnant. So both of the ladies are laughing and smiling about this news, but Jack is just standing there confused, which I find hilarious. But after this, they start to head back to Venganza, but are stopped by Barbossa, who is in a very good mood. So let's dive into the book and see why he's so happy. "Jack! Jack! Hello, Jack!" came a gravelly voice with a West Country accent from behind them. Jack turned to see Captain Barbossa standing there, grinning broadly. The older pirate politely doffed his hat to Esmeralda. "Hello, missy." "Hello, Hector," Jack said, smiling back. "Why so happy? Didn't you hear the news, Jack?" "News? Ah, let me be the first to tell you then. Seems that when Captain Teague's men took our condemned friend Borya down to the dungeons to question him, the little coward sang like a songbird, before they could even heat up the irons or ready the rack, gave up his confederates and disclosed where and when they're supposed to gather to divide up their swag. 'Tis some little island east northeast of Cuba. So Teague knows the identities of the other rogues? Jack was stunned. He does. Captain Teague told me he plans on taking a fleet out to their rendezvous. They'll hide and wait for them all to come sailing in and anchor. Then Teague's fleet will swoop in and capture the lot of the code-breaking blackguards. Barbossa smiled again, but this expression was anything but pleasant. I'm going with him. Some of those misbegotten scurvy knaves will no doubt put up a fight, and I'd like nothing better than to skewer a few, and best believe I intend to help with putting nooses around the necks of the survivors. Esmeralda took a breath. I can hardly believe he just gave them up. Why would he do that? Barbossa snorted derisively. Methinks the Russian figured he had naught to lose, and hadn't the backbone to face being questioned. Perhaps he wanted to face Davy Jones with an intact skin. I confess I'm surprised, Jack said. He seemed defiant during the proceedings today. I figure seeing Davy Jones face to face had much to do with it, Jack, Barbossa said. 'Twould take the defiance out of most buccaneers, eh? Without a doubt, Jack agreed. So can I buy ye and the lady a drink, Jack? I figure I owe ye for helping me gain vengeance from me poor little Polly. Clearly, Barbossa had already been imbibing. His eyes were bright, and so was his nose. Perhaps you'd like something to eat. I have to take Esmeralda back to Venganza, Jack said, but we can join you for just a moment, Hector. Barbossa led the way to a full table and stood before it. The 5 pirates there were drinking and talking animatedly, but one by one they noticed the scarred captain standing there. When all of them fell silent, staring at him, Barbossa gave a quick, sideways jerk of his thumb. Silently, they all got up and left. Jack was impressed, but not terribly surprised. There were stories about Captain Barbossa, how tough he was, how wily, how deviously manipulative. All the accounts also agreed that he was one hell of a dirty fighter. The 3 of them took their seats. What can I be ordering for ye? Barbossa asked. Food? Wine? The 2 of ye did me a service today, and I'm mindful of it. Putting 2 fingers in his mouth, he whistled, and the pimply-faced serving lad appeared immediately. Nothing for us, Hector, Jack said. We can't stay that long. But what Steve had on the fire for dinner smelled good, I'll tell you. A bottle of your best rum, Barbossa said, and the lad vanished. 'Tis thirsty I am, not hungry, Jack. Had me supper not long ago with Captain Borya. You what? Jack and Esmeralda stared at him in undisguised amazement. Aye, I did. Seems he was entitled to a last request, as well as a last meal and drink. Borya requested that I be allowed to join him in his final repast. We shared a bottle of that awful clear swill he drinks. Vodka, he calls it, Barbossa said. The serving lad reappeared and poured Barbossa and Jack a drink. Esmeralda shook her head when she was offered a glass. Leave the bottle, the captain ordered. Why did Borya make seeing you his last request? Esmeralda asked. That seems so strange after what he did. Aye, missy, it does, doesn't it? Seems Borya had the sinking of me cobra on his conscience, and he wanted me to know he was sorry for it. Apologized most sincerely, he did. Captain Teague was there as witness, and he told me that if the pirate lords agreed, he thought Coldonia should be passed on to me, so I wouldn't be a captain without a vessel. That's like being a fish with no water, he said. Barbossa sighed. We used to be good friends once. I told you that, Jack. Yes, you did. But I'd never expected Borya to apologize, Jack said. He did. He told me how he truly regretted the greed he felt when he saw how me cobra was riding low in the water, her holds filled with booty. He was sorry he broke the code, he said. Amazing, Esmeralda exclaimed. Bloody incredible, Jack said. 'Tis true, I swear it. Barbossa put a big, long-nailed hand over the leather strap of his baldric, in the approximate location of his heart. I could hardly believe it myself. Oh, and he gave me this. Said it was his most precious token. His mind must be addled, is all I can say. Reaching into his coat, Barbossa fumbled for a moment, and brought out a small, square block of wood, about 1.5 inches on the side. Jack looked at it, then looked sideways at Esmeralda. She was staring at it wide-eyed. As she caught Jack's gaze, she nodded, as if confirming his unspoken question. Hector, does Captain Teague know Borya gave you this? Jack asked. No, he wasn't in the cell at that moment. He'd stepped outside. You need to be careful of that little token, Jack said. Don't lose it. Show it to Captain Teague as soon as you can. He'll tell you what it is. Barbossa turned the little block over in his fingers. You say this is important? Looks like junk. It is important, Hector. Unless I'm much mistaken, that is one of the 9 pieces of 8. Barbossa frowned. And what might those be, Jack? They're important, Jack assured him. Teague will explain. Very well, Barbossa said. Curiosity flared in his eyes, but he stowed a little bit of wood away. Been an eventful day, hasn't it, Jack? Jack nodded. It has. I'll tell ya, I never thought Borya was the type to turn songbird and out all his secrets, without even a touch of the brand or the rack, Barbossa said thoughtfully. And I was knocked for 6 when I found out who the second rogue was. Never spent any time with the fellow, but he seemed a decent sort, for a Frenchman. Who'd have thought he'd murdered poor old Tommy? Jack's heart seemed to halt for a moment, then stutter rapidly. He found he was holding onto the table, and it was hard to breathe. Borya gave up the second rogue that Davy Jones spoke of? The one he said was here in Shipwreck Cove? Who was it? Barbossa's weather-beaten countenance was full of cheerful malice. He chortled. Turns out it was that popinjay, styles himself de Rapier. That foppish dandy must have twigged that little butcher might sing, 'cause he was caught with his longboats out, towing his brigantine, trying to make it to the tunnel and clean away. But Teague's men blocked him and took him into custody. Searched his vessel. They found that turquoise coat me man Ragetti was talking about hidden in its cabin, too. Barbossa filled his glass and sipped. That was enough for Teague. He condemned him to swing with Borya. Oh, Jack managed. Turning away from Barbossa, his eyes met Esmeralda's. He gave a quick sideways jerk of his head, and she nodded slightly. You're sure you wouldn't have another round with me? If it hadn't been for you two, they'd never been caught, Barbossa proposed. Jack stood up, managing a semblance of a smile as he offered his hand to Esmeralda to help her rise. His face felt frozen. Thank you very much, Hector, but I fear I must be getting this lady back to her grandfather. Perhaps another time. Barbossa grinned. Any time, Jack. He winked at them. You lovebirds run along and have a good time. You're only young once, remember that. He took another swig of rum, then beckoned the serving boy. Lad, bring me a couple of nice crisp apples if you got any. All right, so a lot of revelations in that reading. So, first of all, most exciting part of that is how Borya gave Barbossa his piece of 8, which is a small square block of wood. Barbossa has no idea what it means, however, and I find that so funny, how someone who is so steeped in like pirate history and lore and legends later on just has no idea what the pieces of 8 are currently. I love that. Maybe he only gained the interest after he became a pirate lord, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, this does mean that Hector Barbossa is now the pirate lord of the Caspian Sea. But you might be asking, wait, isn't Ragetti's eye Barbossa's piece of 8? And you are correct. And it is because he carved Borya's block of wood, or maybe Ragetti carved it, into the wooden eye later on. The other big thing revealed here is that Christophe is indeed one of the rogue pirates, and we were getting sneaky suspicions that he was, and now we have the confirmation. Jack is really shaken up by this and tells Esmeralda that he needs to talk to Christophe to get his side of the story. And to do that, Jack has to go down to the dungeons where Christophe is currently being held. If Jack does nothing, Christophe will hang at dawn, so he makes a plan to get him out in case he was wrongfully accused. He needs to get the keys to the cell, and he has to get them from Teague's dog, who carries around all of the keys. Jack thinks that maybe if he feeds the dog, he might be able to get the keys from him, so he borrows some money from Esmeralda to get some food before they both set off toward the troubadour. So once they make their way there, Jack lies to one of Teague's men that he's giving Esmeralda a tour of the ship, so they are let on board. Jack goes to retrieve the spare key to Teague's cabin, and as he is doing this, he thinks about what could happen to him if he is caught. Aiding the escape of a condemned prisoner would be a violation of the code, so that gives us a little idea as to what might end up happening here. But once he gets inside the cabin, he sees the dog, and either the dog is eternal, or Teague just gets ones that look exactly the same, as the current dog looks like the one Jack has seen all throughout his life. Jack then drops the food in front of the dog and waits for him to begin eating. After he finishes, the dog falls asleep, and Jack is able to grab the keys. But just after this, Esmeralda knocks on the door, signaling that Teague is coming back, so he puts the keys back in the dog's mouth, and he pulls Esmeralda into the cabin, and the two of them hide in Teague's large pantry. Teague then unlocks the cabin door, walks inside, and he grabs his guitar and begins to play a bit, while Jack and Esmeralda are still inside the pantry. They are both very close together in this pantry, and they both get obsessed with each other here, and as Teague continues to play his guitar, they start to kiss repeatedly, but another one of Teague's men comes into the cabin, and they both pause. He tells Teague that Christophe has made a last request to see Jack, and Teague agrees to this as long as Jack is watched by one of his men. Roger Mortensen, which is the name of this guy who came in here, asks where Jack might be, and Teague gets up to go find him with Mortensen. Both of them leave the cabin, which leaves Jack and Esmeralda alone in the pantry. They wait a few minutes before they start to make love to each other, and they stay in there for a decent amount of time. But Jack has to go see Christophe, so the both of them make themselves look decent, and Jack grabs the keys back from the dog. They leave Troubadour and make their way to Venganza, where Jack bids goodnight to Esmeralda. She tells him to be careful, and Jack squeezes her hand and tells her he'll see her tomorrow. After that, he takes off toward the dungeons, and once he gets there, he sees Mortensen, who tells Jack he's been looking everywhere for him. He tells Jack that he has to accompany him when he talks to Christophe, so Jack tries to start making a fuss about that to see if Mortensen will give up and let Jack go in alone. Once Mortensen searches Jack, he brings Jack to Christophe's cell, and Christophe lights up when he sees Jack, and Jack gets Mortensen to step back a few steps so they can talk a bit more privately. So let's go back into the book and see what happens here. Jack turned back to Christophe. "What the bloody hell is going on, mate?" he demanded, keeping his voice down. "They told me Borya gave you up as a rogue pirate." Christophe's dark eyes met Jack's unflinchingly. "Jax, mon ami, have I ever lied to you?" "Not that I'm aware of," Jack said cautiously. "Then believe me now, of all times we have spoken truth between us. Jax, I am innocent. Borya has long had hatred for me. I caught him cheating at cards once in Tortuga, and I called him out on it. I challenged him to a duel in front of the entire tavern, but the Russian is, at heart, a coward. He did not have the—" Christophe groped for a word. "The spleen, the stomach, the internal organs," he broke off, grimacing. "The guts?" Jack suggested. "Exactly! The guts to face me in a duel. He could do nothing but turn and walk away. Everyone in the Faithful Bride was laughing at him, calling him coward to his face. He has hated me ever since. So today, when he realized he was going to die, he seized his chance to gain his revenge on me, to make his own passing a bit more bearable by taking me, his enemy, with him. Jack, I swear to you, as Le Bon Dieu is my witness," he crossed himself, "in the name of the Holy Virgin and all the saints, I am innocent." "They say you murdered old One-Tooth Tommy, Christophe," Jack said. "The night he died, you were with me and Esmeralda for the first part of the evening. What did you do after we escorted her back to Venganza?" "I heard that I am also convicted of killing that pitiful old crazy man," Christophe said, twirling his fingers beside his temple. "But Jack, I did not. After we parted from Esmeralda, I rode back to La Vipere, and I went to bed." He paused. "Alone." "Damn," Jack said. "Did anyone see you rowing back?" "Only my crew." "That tears it, then," Jack muttered. "I'd hoped there was someone that could vouch for your whereabouts after you left Venganza. Someone other than your crewman." "I am sorry, but no, there is not." Christophe's shoulders slumped. He clutched the iron bars, hanging his head in despair. He was breathing hard, visibly struggling to control himself. Jack watched him, seeing that his friend's handsome features were smudged and sweaty, stubble and bruises darkened the formerly clean line of his jaw. He must have fought back against the captors, because his elegant clothes were torn and filthy. When the French pirate finally raised his head, Jack was shocked to see his dark eyes were filled with tears. "Jax, tomorrow at dawn they are going to hang me, and all of my men, who are innocent too. We are pirates, yes, but you are a pirate too. We have not broken the code. It is Captain Borya's malice, his final revenge on an enemy that has brought us to this pass. Jax, you are my best friend in all the world. Please, help me." Jack bit his lip and did not reply. Christophe drew a deep, shaky breath. "Please, please, Jax, I am begging you." Jack looked into his friend's eyes for a long moment. Then he took a deep breath. "Sorry, Christophe," he said distinctly. "I wish I could help you, but Teague's given the order for execution and there's no getting around it. Esmeralda says she'll pray for you." "Jax!" Christophe clutched the bars spasmically. "Please!" "I'll be with you in spirit, mate, tomorrow morning," Jack said. Then slowly, deliberately, he winked. Christophe's eyes widened slightly. "Don't worry about how long it will take, mate," Jack continued. "Keep in mind that it will only take a few minutes, then it will be over, Christophe, and you'll be free." He accented the words as much as he dared, which wasn't much, but he knew Christophe was quick. "You'll be free of the bonds of this earth, mate," he added. "Concentrate on that, not on what comes before. Savvy?" He winked again. A spark leaped in Christophe's dark eyes, and he quickly bowed his head and crossed himself again. "I understand, Jax," he said quietly. "You were a good friend to come tonight and offer me spiritual comfort." Jack waved a hand deprecatingly. "Just wish I could do more, mate." Christophe nodded, then, head hanging, he waved sadly at Jack before lying down on the straw in his cell and turning his back to the outside world. So if you didn't get what was going on there, Jack is planning to break Christophe out. He pretends to leave the dungeons, but waits until he knows he isn't being followed. Once he's alone, he makes his way along an old passageway behind the stairs and finds the old collapsed tunnel he had discovered when he was younger. So Jack begins to make his way through this tight passage, and he finally makes his way through. He's now in an old, unused area of the dungeons, and he follows the path until he gets to a door leading to the occupied cell blocks. He uses the keys to open the door and makes his way to Christophe's cell. Jack unlocks Christophe's cell and then frees the rest of his crew. Jack tells them to wait until he gets out before they make a run for it, but this is where Jack realizes he might not have done the right thing. Christophe smiled. It was a sly, cunning expression. Jack found it unsettling, even disturbing. It was almost as though he were looking at a stranger, one wearing Christophe's face and clothes. "Oh yes, Jax, a good laugh, that is most apropos." Turning, he walked away from Jack in his outstretched hand, carrying the ring of keys, and heading for the first cell block. Before de Rapier turned the corner, he carelessly waved his free hand. Jack stood there, gaping as the Frenchman vanished. "Christophe! What the bloody—" He barely registered the sound of the cell door at his back creaking open. He was so stunned to realize that Christophe was, in fact, betraying him. "How can he do this to me?" Jack thought, outraged. "I have to warn Teagues." As Jack drew breath to yell, hard hands seized him and a filthy palm clamped down over his mouth. All around him, Christophe's crew, many of them grinning and waving cheerfully at him, were opening their cells and silently filling out. The pirates holding Jack shoved him forward, and they all headed into the next cell block. The first sight that greeted Jack's eyes when they got there was Borya, stepping out of his cell and embracing de Rapier. "Spasibo, thank you, my brother," he said to Christophe. As he saw Jack, he gave him a mocking salute. "Now let us free the rest of my crew." Jack watched the two rogues as they moved together, talking in whispers, while Christophe busily unlocked the cells containing Coldonia's crew. He felt as though he'd been gut-punched by a battering ram. He couldn't seem to catch his breath, and that was only partly because of the brutal hand clamped over his mouth. His mind raced frantically in circles. Should he fight? Try to break free so he could yell and raise the alarm? His eyes flicked to the mob of silent, grinning cutthroats, and he knew that any motion on his part, he'd be dead within seconds. All the cells were now open. Borya cautioned for quiet, then spoke softly, but clearly. "Remember our plan. When we give the signal, we all go together, running quietly until we see the guards. Then we make plenty noise, da?" He grinned. "Stick to the plan," Christophe added. "Once we deal with the guards, we storm the armory. We need weapons to fight our way out of Shipwreck City. When we reach the docks, we will commandeer every small boat we can and row for our ships. Understand?" Jack saw the huge mob of rogues nodding. He heard the commands being repeated in soft whispers. When silence fell, the tension was so thick Jack felt as though it had sucked all the fetid air from the dungeon. Christophe and Borya stepped slightly apart, clasped their hands together, then suddenly raised them high. Quiet chaos erupted. One moment they were all standing there, silent. Then they were running, still in eerie silence except for the sounds of their feet. Jack's captors shoved him forward, kept him locked in an iron grip. He tried to throw himself to the side, but the men holding him were so strong they nearly picked him up to keep him moving. Hearing the pounding of the feet behind him, he began to run in earnest, realizing that if he threw himself down, he'd be trampled by the men behind him. Moments later he saw the guard post, heard the guards yelling, and only then did the rogues break their silence. Screams and battle cries filled the air, deafening in the echoing dungeon. The next few minutes were a blur as the rogues stormed the guard post. A good dozen of the cutthroats went down before the shots and sword thrusts of the guards, but there were simply too many of them. The guards stood their ground, brave men obeying orders to the last. As the last offender fell, his throat a red ruin, Jack felt the hands holding him loosen, and suddenly he was free. But now there was nowhere to go. He was trapped as if they'd locked him in a cell, trapped by dozens upon dozens of screaming rogue pirates. Now they were emptying the armory. Jack kept trying to make himself small so he could slide free of the mob and hide, or run, if he could just make it into the secret passage. But it was impossible in the melee. Someone thrust a cutlass into his hand. He almost threw it down, but at the last moment he hung on to it. Maybe when they got outside he could cut his way free and bolt. Almost immediately he realized that was a forlorn hope. The moment they reached the top of the stairs and burst out into the night, half of Shipwreck City would know that Jack Sparrow had betrayed his heritage, not to mention breaking the code. If he managed to elude the rogues, Teague and his men would catch him, and he would swing from a yardarm. They probably wouldn't even wait for dawn. The screaming mob was running, and Jack perforce had to run with them, or risk being pounded into a pulp by booted feet should he fall. There were stairs beneath his boots, but they didn't slow the rogues in the least. They raced as fast as sharks converging on a sinking vessel. Jack couldn't keep track of his surroundings. Everything seemed to be light and shadow, torches flickering and sconces on stone walls. Then suddenly he burst out into fresh air, and there was wood beneath his feet, planks instead of stone, stars instead of a ceiling. The rabble of rogues headed for the docks. The din they made was ear-splitting. Stumbling, swearing, Jack tried to break free of the howling throng, but every time he thought he'd managed to make progress, harsh hands seized him, or booted feet kicked him, propelling him forward, thrusting him onward. They were all slowing now, having reached the docks, and all the available small boats. Shrieking rogues raced up ship gangplanks, cutting down or shooting anyone that resisted, then cutting the vessel's boats free, letting them splash down at the cove. Directly ahead of the group Jack was perforce a part of, a large group of pirates approached, heavily armed, carrying torches. Captain Teague was in the lead. The rogue beside Jack raised his musket, taking a bead on the keeper of the code. With a choked cry of protest and a savage swing of his cutlass, Jack knocked the barrel of the musket aside. The shot went wide. The pirate holding the musket turned toward Jack, rage darkening his features. Jack prepared to square off with him before he could reload, but just as he fell into guard position, something large and unyielding struck him hard behind his right ear. Jack's eyes rolled back into his head, and he went down like a scuttled vessel, down, down, into darkness. So Christophe was in fact a rogue pirate after all, and Jack was tricked and betrayed by his friend. Jack then remembers how he woke up the next day on Christophe's ship La Vipere, leagues away from Shipwreck Cove and Esmeralda. That was 5 years ago, and Jack flashes back to the present. The next few days are spent fixing the wench from the damage caused by the storm, and Jack has Chamba talk to Ayisha and Taharka daily before reporting back to him. Jack eventually asks her if she is feeling the pull towards Zerzura yet, and she tells him no. Ayisha says they will be heading to the New World first, but Jack is confused. He asks why they would go that way, and she tells him it is because her brother Shabako was taken to the New World, and they must go and rescue him first. Jack is completely against this idea at first, but Ayisha begins to puke from seasickness again, so Jack takes her down to her cabin. He lays her down, but realizes he accidentally pulled off her shawl, so he turns to give it to her, and his eyes go wide when he realizes what she actually looks like. Jack is immediately taken by Ayisha's real beauty, but she begs him not to tell anyone. Jack promises to keep her secret safe, but he wonders why a sewing woman would have a eunuch bodyguard. Jack realizes that Ayisha is actually Princess Amanirdis after he notices the bracelet she is wearing. Amanirdis is shocked that he knows her real name, and Jack tells her it's because he encountered her father Taharka, and he told Jack her name along with Shabako's. Amanirdis wants to know where Jack met her father, and Jack tells her they met on the deck of a sinking ship, and that Pharaoh Taharka died in his arms. Amanirdis tells him that she knew he was dead since she couldn't feel him like she can still feel Shabako. Apparently, Taharka had found the cure for Aniba and was heading back to Kerma with it. But it wouldn't have done any good anyway, since Aniba passed 3 months after Taharka had left Zerzura. Clearly, they need to talk more, and in private, so Jack leads her up to his cabin and has Lucius Featherstone bring up some broth for her. After she eats, she asks Jack to tell her how he met her father, so Jack begins to tell the story. So we find out it was after Jack had been press-ganged onto La Vipere after he set Christophe and the other rogues free. 3 weeks went by with no sight of land or anything, until the lookout spotted a sail in the distance. Christophe orders the helmsman to change course, and we see here that Robbie Green is also a part of La Vipere's crew. So this is where Jack and Robbie met for the first time. So Jack and Robbie, along with the rest of the crew, get the ship ready for combat, since Jack has no choice but to go along with it. Christophe then comes up behind Jack with his usual charming but deceitful demeanor. Christophe knows that Jack doesn't want to be here, so he is purposefully playing with him and trying to get Jack angry. Jack knows that Christophe is only looking for an excuse to kill him, but Jack plays along for now. Christophe agrees to let Jack join the boarding party, albeit only with a cutlass as he doesn't trust Jack with a pistol. La Vipere raises its red flag and begins to fire on the opposing ship. After a few volleys, the other ship raises a white flag in surrender, but obviously that means nothing to the rogues, so the rogues close in and prepare to board. Jack and the rest of the boarding party make their way onto the Dutch ship, and Jack sees Christophe stab the Dutch captain without even a second of hesitation. After that, the rest of the butchery begins, and Jack tries to seclude himself from the rest of the rogues. He occasionally stabs an already dead body just to get blood on his sword, but then he hears a man call out to him. So let's go and see what happens here. Jack hastily laid the blade on the deck, then dropped down and crawled until he could kneel next to him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wish I could help." The man's breathing was labored, his English accented, but Jack had no trouble understanding him. "Have you water, sir?" "Sorry, mate, no," Jack said. "No matter," the wounded man said. "Soon enough, I will no longer feel thirst." Jack gave the amount of blood on his clothes and the strange angle at which his left leg rested an assessing glance, and figured the poor chap was right. "Just rest," he said, as soothingly as he could. He wished there was something he could do, but there was nothing. "I will rest later," the man said. "Please, sir, you must listen. When the mast came down, I knew that I would die. As I lay here, I prayed to my god, Apademak. In answer to my prayer, he granted me a vision. He promised me he would send," he gasped for breath and continued, "send me a good man. And then I saw your face in my vision." "Me? The poor devil must be off his head with pain," Jack thought. "Look at the angle of his leg. It's no wonder he's raving. And if he's not, then his god has a cruel sense of humor. The poor devil prays for a good man, and he gets me?" "Yes," the dying man panted for breath. "Apademak has sent you to me. He has chosen you. Please, sir, you must listen." "Where have I heard the name Apademak before?" Jack wondered. "I'm listening," he said reassuringly. "I traveled here from the island of Kerma," the man gasped. "I left the shining city, seeking a cure for my little son, Aniba." Jack's mouth dropped open, and his eyes widened. He couldn't possibly have heard him right, could he? "Zerzura," he blurted. "You came here from Zerzura?" The man's teeth flashed white, stained with red, as he tried to smile. "You know of my island. Good. This proves the god sent you to me. I am Pharaoh Taharka, ruler of Kerma. I wanted to find—" He broke off, gasping. "The cure for Prince Aniba," Jack said. "Yes, I understand, your Majesty. I knew when I heard your footsteps that you were the one. Apademak led you to me," the Pharaoh said. "I prayed so hard, and I saw the lion god. He promised me a good man, one who will go to Kerma and tell my queen. I have been gone many months, but my talisman guided me. I found the cure." Jack nodded. "That's good," he said. "You traveled a long way for it." "I did," Taharka agreed. "The woman of power. I found her in a strange house on the Pantano River. Swamp. So many candles." He had to stop to catch his breath. "She said I must trade for cure." He gasped in pain, then moaned. "Easy," Jack said. "You shouldn't talk. Rest." He's talking about Tia Dalma, he realized. Her cures are famous, but she demands a trade. His mind was still reeling at the notion that he was talking to someone from the legendary island. Taharka's right hand lifted. He gripped Jack's wrist, his fingers unexpectedly strong. "I must speak. You need to know." "All right," Jack said gently. "All right. Tell me then." "I had cure, but now it is lost." Taharka's voice was filled with sadness. "Tell them I fulfilled—" "You fulfilled your promise," Jack said. "You did. I will tell them." He took a deep breath and realized he could smell smoke. The flute was on fire. It was a good thing the rogues had emptied the powder magazine. "Tell my wife, Queen T. Tell my daughter, Princess Amenirdis, and my son, who will be Pharaoh, Prince Shabako. Tell them all of my fate, please." "I swear on pain of death that if I can find them, I will tell them," Jack said, "as if I could find Zerzura. But what harm could it do to make a promise to ease a dying man's passing?" Hearing this, the Pharaoh relaxed slightly. He tried to draw a deep breath, but coughed instead. At length he whispered, Good. My thanks, sir." His fingers loosened slightly on Jack's wrist. His eyes closed for a moment, then flew open, and his grip tightened. "One more thing. You must return my talisman to Zerzura." "Talisman? My bracelet." The Pharaoh painfully raised his left hand to touch a slender strip of woven grass that circled his right wrist. A small, flat gray pebble was centered on it, with a few lines scratched into the stone. Jack squinted down at the pebble, realizing that from the proper angle the lines resembled a crude representation of a lion's head. Watch, Taharka gasped. He closed his fingers on a strip of woven grass. In the gloom beneath the canvas, Jack saw a greenish glow surround the wristlet for a moment. When Taharka moved his hand away, Jack gasped, seeing that the bracelet had transformed. It was now a golden marvel with a pale green stone and the image of a lion's head, beautifully formed by the hand of a master goldsmith. Take it, Taharka commanded, pulling it free with what was evidently the last of his strength. Jack raised his hand uncertainly, and the pharaoh pushed the bracelet into his fingers. Then his hand dropped limply to his chest. He gasped and gasped again, unable to draw breath. Jack slid his arm beneath the dying man's head and shoulders, raising him, hoping that would help him catch his breath. Taharka coughed, and more blood stained his dark skin, but the support helped. He was able to draw breath. Thank you, he whispered. May I know your name? Jack Sparrow. Jack Sparrow. Taharka was making a last valiant effort to speak, and it cost him dearly. Never forget, Jack Sparrow. Abademak has chosen you to protect the heart. My son, my daughter, they have the other two talismans. Only all three may open the labyrinth. I understand, Jack said softly. You will sail to Kerma. You will enter the labyrinth, and when the proper time comes, you will remember my words. You will understand the peril to my people. Please protect Zerzura as I would. But, Jack began, you must go. Zerzura. Save. His voice stopped. Sir? Jack stared from the bracelet in his hand to the man's still face. Pharaoh Taharka, can you hear me? The body that he held suddenly felt heavier. Jack eased the pharaoh back down and touched his throat. No pulse. He can't hear me anymore. He'll never hear anything again in this world. He pulled his hand away, seeing that his fingers were slick with blood. Jack wiped them clean on the man's coat, then closed Taharka's eyes. So Jack has been chosen to protect Zerzura, but right after Taharka dies, Christophe shows up and sees Jack with Taharka's golden bracelet. He grabs the bracelet from Jack, and this is the excuse Christophe has been waiting for. He tells Jack concealing booty from the crew is an offense punishable by death. So Christophe's men grab Jack and bring him back to La Vipere as the Dutch ship sinks. Instead of killing Jack on the spot, Christophe gives him a bit of mercy since he did set him and his crew free. So he decides to leave Jack in a rowboat with oars and a cutlass but no pistol. He asks his crew if Jack should have food or water, but they of course say no, so Jack is then shoved into the boat and dropped into the sea. As La Vipere begins to sail away, Jack yells out that Esmeralda kissed him, and this angers Christophe as he grabs a musket and tries to shoot Jack. But Robbie pushes the musket into the air so it misses, and he then jumps over the rail into the water. Robbie doesn't surface for a while until La Vipere is far enough away, but then he swims over to Jack's boat. Jack asks why he should come along, and Robbie tells him he brought water and food with him. So the two of them shake hands and they introduce themselves to each other. After this, Jack pulls out his compass, and Robbie at first thinks it's broken, but Jack thinks about an island with fresh water and food, and the compass begins to point in that direction. Over the next few days, Jack learns more about Robbie and how he was press-ganged onto a ship at the age of 10. That we already knew, but after that happened, he deserted when they docked in Port Royal and became a cabin boy on a ship bound for England. Unfortunately, this ship fell prey to La Vipere, and Robbie was then forced to join Christophe's crew. Jack tells Robbie they're going to become honest merchant sailors and start a new life, and they reach an island where they wait for a week before they're picked up by an EITC ship, where they signed on and never looked back. We then flash back to the present, where Jack has just finished telling this story to Ayisha. She asks if Robbie got to go home to his parents, and Jack tells her that a year after they began sailing together, they docked in Bristol, and Robbie realized his parents had both died from a plague that swept through his village. Both of his sisters had gotten married and left, and since no one knew their names, Robbie gave up trying to find them. But Ayisha asks if Christophe still has Taharka's bracelet, and Jack tells her it is very likely that he does, given that he wouldn't sell one of the keys to the treasure of Zerzura. But for the moment, they focus on trying to find Shabako, and Jack gives Ayisha his compass. She's actually able to tell that it is an object of great power, and after she thinks about him, the compass points west, and Jack changes their course. We knew that Don Raphael had died, but we find out here that Christophe was actually the one who did it. It happened 2 years after Jack was pulled away from Shipwreck Cove. Christophe shot him right in the back. And as Jack sets the new course, he thinks about how he is ready to get revenge on Christophe in due time. But after this, we go back to Calabar, where Cutler Beckett is reading his mail that had just arrived. Most important of these letters is one from Viscount Lord Penwallow, and in the letter he praises Jack for delivering the building materials in perfect condition. But Penwallow also tells Beckett he will need more hands on the plantation, which of course means slaves. Penwallow also requests that Jack be the one to transport them. When the plantation is finished, Penwallow is eager to introduce Beckett to his friends at court, and this gets Beckett excited as he is even closer to potentially securing recognition, and most importantly, a title. But after this, Mercer arrives, and we find out he has been tracking down Tarek, but he had escaped from the Dalton farm. Beckett realizes he went missing the same night Jack left, and deduces that Jack took him along with Ayisha. But Beckett doesn't mind this as he begins planning the supplies and manpower that will be required when he gets the coordinates to Kerma. They decide on hiring hundreds of soldiers and 5 ships to transport them so they can capture Zerzura. Mercer decides to hire prisoners and mercenaries as well, but Beckett draws the line at pirates since he despises them. And now we are about to find out why. So after only a few months of working at the EITC office in London, he was assigned to a tour of duty at the EITC office in Gibraltar. But on the way there, the ship Beckett was on was captured by pirates, and the captain of this pirate ship was none other than Christophe. Yeah, a lot of coincidence with Christophe here. Now, I want you to remember that Beckett is only 18 at this point in time. Christophe is amused with how fiery Beckett is, and he tells his crew they can play with him. Please be advised, this next part is very not PG, so if you want to skip ahead like 30 seconds, you can do so. Christophe's crew then begins to torture Beckett, and they first spank him repeatedly with their swords, and after this, they strip him naked and hang him upside down from the mast, dangling in the air. Beckett at this point is sobbing uncontrollably, and after this, they let him down and begin to prod at him with their swords, poking him and drawing blood. But Beckett once again goes away like he did back at the schoolhouse, and also like he does right before he dies in At World's End. This freaks out Christophe's crew, so they leave him alone. Beckett then tells Christophe that he comes from a wealthy family and works for the EITC, so they put out ransom letters for him. Weeks go by before a letter from Penwallow comes in, who has paid the ransom for Beckett. No notice ever arrived from Beckett's father, and this is the final straw for him. After he is turned loose in Gibraltar, he writes to Penwallow, thanking him and promising to pay him back. And he did so by rising through the ranks super quickly. But he snaps out of his memories and begins to write down the names of the ships that will be armed to storm Zerzura. And the Wicked Wench is the first name he writes on that list. So chapter 12 then starts as the Wicked Wench sails to the New World to find Shabako. Jack also makes up a story as to why Ayisha and Tarek are on board the ship, and he tells the crew that they are from a previously unknown tribe in Africa the EITC is eager to trade with. Now they need to find the prince of the tribe, and Jack tells him they could make a bonus for this voyage. That's more than enough for the crew to hear, though, and that issue has now been dealt with. Ayisha then begins to ask Chamba to teach her to read English, and they practice together for an hour every day. And after the crew notice she's good at sewing, she begins to fix and patch up their clothes for them. While she does this, Jack is practicing swordplay with Robbie, Lucius, and Etienne, as he wants to be ready when he encounters Christophe. The wench docks in Antigua soon after, and Jack notices that Ayisha has even mended his own clothes. So he goes to thank her, and he gives her back the earrings that Beckett had got from Duke Renjon, which had originally belonged to her. We see here that Ayisha is realizing that Jack is indeed a good man, and she is starting to maybe fall for him. To show how much she is thankful for him, she decides to embroider one of Jack's plain coats and one of his waistcoats, since she knows that Jack loves flamboyant and bright things. After they leave Antigua, they continue sailing until they reach New Avalon, which is where Jack believes Shabako is. They make a plan to dock in Viviana and row up the river to the specific plantation. Jack will know when the compass points to it. So Jack, Chamba, and Ayisha row up the river, and they find the dock leading to the plantation holding Shabako. So Jack orders them to row back to the ship to make a plan, since he realizes that Shabako is on the plantation next door to where Penwallow's new estate is being built. Jack then pops down to the tavern and learns the plantation Shabako is on is called Wickhaven and is owned by John Fenwick. So after this, he assembles Robbie, Chamba, Ayisha, and Tarek in his cabin to discuss their plan. They first think of maybe buying Shabako, but realize they wouldn't have enough money to purchase him, especially if Fenwick sees Jack being picky and potentially raising the price. Jack then goes to put his new shoes in his sea chest and sees Ayisha's handiwork. Jack is impressed by the embroidery and tries it on, and after seeing that he looks as distinguishable as a lord, he has an idea. So the next morning, Jack rents a coach and has himself driven out to Sweet Providence, which is Penwallow's estate grounds. Jack is dressed to the nines, wearing an embroidered coat, and he's well-groomed and everything. He's got like a little wig on. And Chamba is also here too, dressed well to fit in with Jack. Jack introduces himself to the butler as Frederick Penwallow, who, if you remember, is Penwallow's son. So Jack meets up with Tobias Montgomery, who is supervising the construction of the estate, and Jack is given a tour of the grounds. Jack uses the extensive information he learned from Penwallow to make his way through the conversations, and he then tells Montgomery he would like to view a running plantation, such as Wickhaven, so he takes Jack over there. So Jack then dines with Fenwick and his family, and is then taken on a tour of Wickhaven. Chamba and Tarek are both with Jack, acting as his slaves, and Tarek keeps an eye out for Shabako and lets Jack know Shabako is in the 15th row of water carriers. So Jack, Chamba, and Tarek enact their master plan. He waited, standing there patiently, knowing that Tarek must be signaling Chamba, as they had arranged previously. Jack took a deep breath as he waited for the next act of their little comedy. Or was it a drama? He couldn't decide. As he stood there, Jack heard the sound he'd been expecting. Chamba gave a low moan. The white silk parasol came tumbling down, bouncing onto the dirt of the cane field, then lying there. Tarek cried out a soft, wordless exclamation. Jack swung around to see Chamba lying limply on the ground. What happened? Tarek babbled at him in pidgin as he knelt beside the younger man, slapping his cheeks, trying to bring him around. Chamba, of course, did not respond. Jack sighed theatrically and picked up the parasol. He grimaced as he brushed the dirt off it. Lud, look at that. I'll have to have it cleaned, he commented. Then, looking down at Chamba, he shook his head, annoyed. Fainted from the heat, he said to Fenwick. What a nuisance. Fenwick nodded in silent agreement. Just then, Shabako trotted toward row 15, carrying fresh buckets of water. Jack gestured at the youth. You there, water boy, over here. Obedient to the command of a white man, the young Pharaoh turned and trotted toward him. With a rush of excitement, Jack noticed the battered strip of rawhide circling the youth's wrist. Tarek was kneeling beside Chamba, speaking again in pidgin. Jack knew what he was saying, even though he didn't understand the words. Tarek, Jack ordered, you and this water boy carry Chamba there, where those trees give him shade. He pointed to the trees at the edge of the cart track leading down to the dock. Keep him out of this sun and give him water. Tarek nodded obediently. I'm going to continue my tour with Mr. Fenwick, Jack added. If Chamba comes too, you two meet me back in the carriage yard by the barrachet. I won't be terribly long. Tarek asked him a question in pidgin. Well, if he doesn't come too, carry him back to my father's plantation, and tell Mr. Montgomery I sent you. Tobias probably has someone that can help you see to him. It's possible he'll need bleeding, I suppose. Tarek inclined his head in a minimal bow, indicating he would follow his master's orders. Jack headed off with Fenwick. Together they followed their loaded carts toward the cane-pressing equipment. With one part of his mind, he listened to Fenwick's explanation about how the sugarcane juice was treated once it was squeezed from the pieces of cane by the giant press, but mostly he was conscious of the moments going by. In his mind's eye, Jack could picture what was happening. In a few minutes, Shabako and Tarek would reach the shelter of the trees beside the cart track leading down to the river. In their shade, they gently put Chamba down, as close to the woods as they could, while still remaining in sight. If Shabako hadn't already recognized Tarek, dressed as he was as a livered servant, Taharka would then speak to the young pharaoh in their native language, explaining that he and Chamba had come there with his sister to free him. Making sure that no one was watching them, Chamba and Shabako would move closer and closer to the woods until they could slip out of sight behind the trees, leaving Taharka in sight of the cane field. When no one could see them, Chamba would change clothes with Shabako. The two youths were close to each other in height. They were about the same age, and they were both lean, though Shabako was much thinner. Jack had been able to count his ribs as the young pharaoh had approached them. As soon as Shabako was wearing Chamba's livery, the young pharaoh would head down to the river to rendezvous with his sister. Then with Shabako hidden in the bottom of the dinghy, Devere and Featherstone would row back to the Wicked Wench as rapidly as they could. Ayisha and Robbie would then conceal the young pharaoh aboard the wench just in case there was a hue and cry. But Jack was pretty sure that nobody at Wickhaven would notice that Shabako was gone, not until tomorrow night at least. That was because Chamba was going to put on Shabako's discarded slave rags, pick up his yoke with the water buckets, and then go back to work in the fields, carrying water to the cane choppers. Taharka had explained to Jack that most slave owners, or even the overseers, couldn't tell one black face from another. His fellow slaves might be able to realize Chamba wasn't Shabako, but the lad had planned to keep his distance from them. When the workers headed back to the slave compound near sunset, he'd mumble something in pidgin about having cramps in his gut, then head off to the public midden in the slave compound. Chamba would stay away from the other slaves, playing sick until sunset, then line up with the others for the overseer's head count. As long as the overseer counted the right number of slaves before darkness fell, no alarm would be raised. In the middle of the night, when everyone was asleep, Chamba would sneak out of the compound, head down to the river where Jack, Robbie, and an armed contingent of Jack's most capable fighters would be waiting in a longboat, just in case anyone followed him and raised the alarm. Jack told himself that Chamba would surely be able to escape. No fence could keep that agile lad inside the compound, even presuming there was a fence. He made a mental note to ask Shabako as soon as he arrived back at the ship. If Chamba didn't show up, Jack was fully prepared to lead his party to the slave compound if that's what it took. He was only too aware of the loyalty his crewmen had shown him by agreeing to becoming a slave again for one more night. He would not leave him behind. He had given Chamba his word. Jack listened to Fenwick, counting the minutes until he could thank his host for the tour, give Fenwick's hand a hearty shake, then go back to the stables and climb into his rented barouche. After his experience with Caesar, Jack had gotten Taharka to show him how to drive this morning, before they set off along the plantation road. He felt fairly confident that he could drive the barouche for as long as it took to reach Taharka, who would be waiting for him near the road once he was out of sight of Wickhaven. Taking a deep breath, Jack told himself to relax, that his plan was sound. He'd get back to Viviana, return the barouche and team, then take back the rented clothing and this cursed wig. Well before dawn, the Wicked Wench would turn her stern to the Viviana port, and Jack Sparrow would have 2 of the 3 bracelets necessary to get into the labyrinth. Jack smiled faintly. 2 down, 1 to go. You're going to be very surprised when I come calling, Christophe. So the plan works out, and Shabako gets down to the dock and into the boat with his sister, Lucius, and Etienne. Once Shabako is hidden in the boat, they row back to the wench. And don't worry about Chamba, as he was able to easily escape with no extra help. So once everyone is back aboard, the wench leaves Viviana and heads off toward their next destination, which is finding Christophe. Jack gives his helmsman the new bearing from his compass, which indicated Christophe was somewhere to the north. Jack decides to have a little celebration for their success so far, so he brings Robbie, Chamba, and the 3 Zerzurans into his cabin, where they eat and drink, and Jack even has some of his best rum for the occasion. We see here that Jack is falling for Ayisha as well, and after the party is concluded, Jack heads up to the quarterdeck and sees they're all coming up on the southwest point of Great Abako Island. Once they are close enough, they will change course to go into the northwest Providence Channel. This will take them between Great Abako Island and the Berry Islands, avoiding the shoals. They make their way into the channel with ease, and everything is going according to plan. But then the lookout yells there is a sloop off the lee bow, and Jack immediately thinks it could be La Vipere, but he shrugs it off, not drawing any conclusions yet. From the lookout's view, the sloop is about 7 or 8 miles off, so Jack decides to go for a better look. When he puts his spyglass on the sloop, he sees it is a Bermuda-rigged sloop, and he suspects it's none other than Borya. Jack immediately begins calling out orders, not getting too rash, since he doesn't know for sure yet, but he and Robbie both have a sneaking suspicion it is indeed Borya. So let's go back into the book here. Jack, he said softly, do you think it's him? I think we'll find out before long, Robbie, Jack said, but for what it's worth. He trailed off and nodded. Yes, I do. God help us, Robbie whispered. Beneath his tan, he was pale. He was the only man Captain de Rapier ever feared. "He's human," Jack said. "It's not like he's some kind of bloody demon. And we're aboard the Wench, Robbie. She's a good ship. She's quick to the hand, and she has teeth." Jack glanced to port, then back at his first mate, his friend. "Robbie, we can fight, and we will. We may lose, we may go down, but if we do, by Neptune's beard, that Russian son of a bitch will know he's been in a scrap." Robbie nodded. Jack could see that he was trying to stay impassive, but he knew him too well to miss the fear in his eyes. "Don't forget, I know these waters, Robbie. I'm wagering I know them better than Borya does. I've got an idea how to get him. You're a praying man. Pray it works. Pray hard." "I will, Jack." Jack smiled and clapped Robbie on the shoulder. "I believe I gave you an order, Mr. Green." "Aye, Captain," Robbie said. He tried to smile, then turned away. Jack heard him giving orders and felt the Wench turn again, swinging back to starboard, heading due north. He headed down the ladder, then turned and went into his cabin. All his charts had been put away to make room for the little gathering earlier, but a quick search produced the right one. Jack lifted it, and with an expert snap of his wrist, sent it unrolling across the table. He bent over it, studying it. He ordered the course changed based on memory. Now it was time to check and double-check what lay to the north. After looking again at the chart, Jack went back to the quarterdeck, moving fast to examine the traverse board, where all the Wench's positions, as determined by the chip log, were recorded, using pegs to mark their progress. Quickly he checked them, then, holding the figures in his mind, he ran back down the ladder, back to the chart. Muttering the numbers, he hastily grabbed a quill and some ink, then scratched them onto a scrap of parchment. Then he went back over to the chart again. Finally, Jack sagged into his chair and absently capped his bottle of ink. He was sure of their position now. The Wicked Wench was not quite 20 miles from an uncharted deep-water inlet, a trawl in the coral reef about 1 mile wide and 3 miles long. The inlet dead-ended just east of the northernmost tip of the little island called Gorda Cay. If the Wicked Wench continued due north on her current course, all Jack had to do was turn just a little bit to the northeast, and his ship would sail right into the inlet, and Borya would follow him. Jack knew where the trawl began. He also knew where it abruptly dead-ended. He was betting Borya didn't. He knew his plan was risky. If he didn't time this maneuver just right, he and his crew would wind up trapped, sitting ducks. On the other hand, if he were successful, the pirate sloop would run aground, and the Wench would be free to come about and blast her to flinders with her 12-pounders. A ship that couldn't move couldn't aim her cannons properly. Jack took a deep breath and crossed his fingers. All I need is good timing and a bit of luck. So not long after this, the sloop raises the red rogue flag, and Jack orders Robbie to call all hands. Once all the men gather, Jack tells them that they will be facing rogue pirates, so they must not surrender. Robbie gets the crew pumped up, and soon after they are all pumping their fists in the air, chanting victory. Jack then goes over to Tarek, Shabako, and Ayisha and informs them of what is happening. He wants them to go all the way down to the cargo hold and find a spot down there to hide. Ayisha wants to help, however, but Jack tells her unless she can blow up Borya's powder magazine, she can't help, so Tarek pulls her below decks. Jack's plan is to get Borya too far into the shoals to recover. So Jack is employing a tactic called anchoring by the stern on their starboard side, and this intends the crew hauling the anchor cable from the bow to the stern, then passing it out the aftmost gun port to the starboard side. Then the crew will haul the cable alongside the hull back to the bow, where they will secure it to the spare anchor. This will bring the ship to an abrupt halt once the wind is spilled from the sails. Since Borya is coming up on their port side, he won't be able to see any of this prep work. Borya fires off one of his starboard guns, but it falls short. He continues to fire as he gets closer, and Jack is waiting for the next landmark, which is Rocky Point on Great Abaco Island. Once they are opposite to the tip of the point, Jack is assured they are on the right course. And Robbie tells Jack the anchor is ready. Once Jack glimpses the sandbar signaling their entrance into the deep-water inlet, he turns the wheel gently as they enter the trawl. Koldunya follows them in, and Jack is waiting for the opportune moment to trick Borya into running aground. As the Wench turns to port, so does Koldunya, and it smashes into the sandbar. Jack calls for them to drop anchor, and as they do so, Jack feels the Wench lift up, and he is thrown to the deck as the Wench also runs aground. So Jack is now nervous as his plan did not work out the way it thought it would, and both ships are now in firing range with each other. Jack gets up as he hit his head from the crash, and he is feigning in and out of consciousness. The Wench then begins to fire on the Koldunya, and Koldunya begins to fire back. Meanwhile, down in the hold, Ayisha wants to help. Shabako allows her to go and has Tarek accompany her. As they make their way up, the cannons begin to fire, and Ayisha is wondering what she can do. She thinks back to what Jack said about blowing up Borya's powder magazine, which he had said sarcastically, but she is actually thinking about it. She then decides to weave a spell to do so, but she needs to be in the open air, within sight of the enemy to do it, where she won't be disturbed. Jack's cabin is the location that comes to her mind, so the two of them make their way there. Back with Jack, things aren't going so well. He has the carpenter fixing and patching holes in the ship and trying to make sure they won't run out of cannonballs. Thankfully, he had requested the extra ammunition from Beckett, or he would have run out by now. The ship was also taking on water, so Jack now has crewmen pumping the bilges in shifts. Chamba tells him most of the longboats have been destroyed, and Jack is getting more and more nervous. They can't hold out forever. And as he goes down to check with the gunnery master, a cannonball comes right through the hull, and splinters of wood fly everywhere. Jack sees he has a 3-inch wood splinter in his left shoulder, and Jack orders Chamba to pull it out and tie his neckcloth around the wound. Chamba does what he's told, and as he does that, Jack looks over at the men who are gathered around someone lying on the deck. Jack couldn't tell who the man lying on the deck was because the man's head was missing. Jack notices that Coldunya has stopped firing, and he sees that they are pulling the sloop off the sandbar. Their time is running out now, and Jack has Mr. Parker unbolt a 6-pounder and move it into his cabin. That way they can fire at Borya as he comes close. Jack makes his way back to the weather deck and sees Lucius hovering over Etienne's body. Lucius tells Jack that a cannonball hit the rigging and the lee clew block came down. Etienne pushed Lucius out of the way, and now Lucius thinks he's dead. Jack feels a pulse and tells Lucius that he is still alive. He tells Chamba and Lucius to bring Etienne down to the orlop deck with the rest of the wounded. Meanwhile, Ayisha and Tarek are in Jack's cabin and she is waiting for Borya to cease fire. She starts preparing for the spell, and she sees Coldunya starting to move. She begins to weave the spell, repeating Borya and Coldunya over and over and over again to add more power to the spell. She continues to weave as she repeats the names over and over, growing more tired each time she does so. And eventually, right before she passes out, she feels the spark of the powder on Borya's ship, and in seconds, the magazine lights and Coldunya blows up. Borya and the rest of his bloodthirsty rogues are no more. Jack sees this happen right before they move the 6-pounder into his cabin, not knowing what caused it. Tarek then gets Jack to help him as he cannot wake Ayisha. They get her into her bunk below deck before Tarek explains what happened. He tells him that Ayisha had ignited the powder magazine through magic, and Jack is incredibly amazed. He asks Tarek if she will wake up, and Tarek says her heart still beats, so she is still alive. Later that night, after the sun sets, Robbie comes up to Jack and tells him he has bad news. He tells Jack that there are 2 holes that haven't been patched since they are below the waterline in very hard spots to reach. Jack tells him to have them try at least, despite him knowing that his crew is completely exhausted. 3 men have died from the battle with 7 wounded. Jack tells Robbie to get some sleep in his cabin for a bit since he is far too awake to go to sleep. As Jack peruses the deck, he hears someone calling out from the starboard side. So let's go back into the book and see who it is. "Ahoy!" shouted a voice to starboard. Jack whirled around so fast he nearly dropped his lantern. "Who's there?" he demanded. He blinked painfully as he made out running lights not far away, shining in the darkness, and he heard the swish of water against a bow. The lights swam before him as he tried to focus his stinging eyes. "Am I hallucinating?" "Ahoy!" shouted the voice again, then continued in Spanish. "Anyone alive over there? Do you need help?" It was real. There really was a ship out there hailing him. Jack hesitated. A Spanish vessel, just my bloody luck. But at least England and Spain weren't currently at war. Or they hadn't been, last he heard. What if she's in their pirate vessel? 2 in 1 bloody day. Should I keep silent? Hope they'll pass by? Jack told himself not to be ridiculous. Even having everything valuable on the Wicked Wench stolen, and himself and his crew sold as slaves, was better than sinking to the bottom. And most pirates he knew wouldn't ask if another ship needed help. Jack put his lantern down on the deck, then cupped his hands around his mouth. "Ahoy!" he shouted, then continued in Spanish. "Merchant vessel Wicked Wench here. Pirates attacked us today. Yes, we need help." He heard the voice drift across the water, no longer shouting, but evidently addressing someone aboard. He only picked up the word Capitan. Clearing his throat, Jack spat over the side, wishing he had something to drink. He cupped his hands around his mouth again. "What ship are you?" he shouted, still in Spanish. There was a pause, then, "Venganza!" floated across the water. Jack's eyes opened wide. He gasped astonishingly, then slowly he began to grin. He wanted to dance a jig, but he was too tired, and his arms ached too much. Clutching the railing to steady himself, he yelled this time in English, "Esmeralda! Are you there?" A different voice responded this time. "Dios mío! Jack?" Jack closed his burning eyes, hearing a long, profound sigh of relief. Robbie will never let me hear the end of this. So Jack is saved miraculously by Venganza. We then go on to chapter 14, and Esmeralda and her crew come on board to help Jack and his crew. Part of Venganza's crew were now working the bilge pumps, and Esmeralda's ship surgeon, Dr. Martinez, was looking after Jack's wounded. After Jack is finished eating the food Esmeralda brought him, she starts to treat his wound. She pulls the rest of the splinters out and cleans off the blood. She then pours rum over the wound to cauterize it, and Jack is annoyed she wasted some perfectly good rum to do so. He then takes a swig for himself, and after his wound is treated, she brings him to his cabin to get some sleep, and the two of them spend the night together. The next morning, they both wake up, and Jack is still a little foggy on what happened last night, given that he was almost delirious from the blood loss and the rum he had drunk. The two of them make love to each other, and later in the day, the rest of the water in the Wench was pumped out, and the holes are filled. Ayisha finally wakes up around noon, albeit very weak, and Jack goes below deck with Chamba to oversee what cargo had been affected by the battle, and unfortunately, half the cargo would be declared a loss. That night, Esmeralda invites Jack and Robbie to dine with her aboard Venganza. They both clean themselves up, and they row over to Venganza. So the three of them talk and catch up a bit, and we're going to go back into the book here and see what happens. "I remember the last time we went to the Drunken Lady," Jack said, "and you talked to Marie. She's had her baby by now?" "Of course! It only takes 9 months, Jack, not 5 years, she said, amused. "Boy or girl?" "She had a little boy," Esmeralda said, "and then, a year later, a little girl. And the last time I heard from her, she said she was expecting again. We write, but I haven't seen her in years." "You haven't been to Shipwreck Cove?" "Oh, certainly. But they aren't there anymore. When Steve discovered Marie was with child, he packed them up and they left. He said it wouldn't be fair for a child to try and raise it in Shipwreck Cove. He'd saved his money, and they moved to a little town named Raleigh in the colonies, and bought a tavern there." "Steve did the right thing," Jack said gravely. "He was right. Shipwreck Cove is no place to raise a child." The fact that Jack had been raised there wasn't mentioned. "So what happened to the Drunken Lady?" Robbie said. "I used to enjoy going there. Marie was a good cook. I remember her spiced apple tarts." Jack nodded. "They were good, weren't they? You're making me hungry, Robbie." "Good," Esmeralda said, "because they will be bringing our dinner any moment. The tavern's still there at Shipwreck Cove, but they don't serve food anymore, just spirits. It's gone downhill, sad to say." The meal was, as Jack had promised, delicious, and especially tasty to men who had subsisted for months on ship's biscuit, salted meat, and apples. Esmeralda's cook had prepared sea turtle soup for the first course. The main entree was roasted marinated pork, accompanied by fried yellow cornmeal cakes, white potatoes, cooked greens, and for a sweet at the end of the meal, fried plantains drizzled with a banana-flavored liquor. Pirates almost always ate better than merchant sailors or naval crewmen. Their voyages were usually short by comparison with those of other mariners, so they restocked more frequently with fresh food. While they dined, Esmeralda asked her guest to tell her the entire story of the chase and fight with Coldunya. "I'll tell you our story," Jack promised, "but then you have to tell me how the devil you happened to be so close enough to Great Abaco to see the explosion when Coldunya blew up." Esmeralda nodded. "Fair enough, but you go first." Jack undertook to give her a summary of the events, with occasional help from Robbie. He was careful to leave out any mention of Zerzura or its treasure, or of his approaching search for Christophe. Jack knew that Esmeralda had been searching for the man who had killed Don Raphael ever since her grandfather's murder. If she'd known that Jack was about to make an alliance with him to go after treasure, she'd be justifiably furious. Jack did mention the Zerzurans, but told Esmeralda the same tale he'd spun for his crew, about the 3 former slaves being high-born members of a previously unknown tribe in North Africa. As an example of the tribe's skill with weaving and sewing, he showed her his waistcoat. Esmeralda was fascinated by this tale, and admired his waistcoat. "What is the princess like?" Jack chose his words carefully. Princess Ayisha appears to be middle-aged, maybe older. The first time I saw her, I thought that the kindest word you could use to describe her would be homely. You said that she took a hand in the battle? How? Jack glanced over at Robbie, who was staring at him, obviously wondering whether this was yet another fabrication on Jack's part. Jack looked at her. Esmeralda, you've been sailing around the Caribbean for a long time, he said. You know about curses and magic and hoodoo and obey. You know that in the Caribbean they really exist, right? Jack, I've seen Davy Jones, remember? That's right, you did, Jack said. I was thinking about that day not too long ago. So what's this about magic, she asked. Well, a lot of the magic and obey lore in the Caribbean comes from the Africans that have been transported here, savvy? Jack said. She nodded. Well, I didn't really know it until a few weeks ago, but it seems the princess I'm transporting for Mr. Beckett is pretty skilled in that kind of thing. Until yesterday, I thought her ability was limited to casting illusions, but it seems she can do a lot more than that. He took a deep breath. When Ayisha said, "Can I help?" I told her no, not unless you can blow up Borya's powder magazine. Now Robbie, too, was sitting up straight in his seat, gazing intently at Jack. Jack shrugged and shook his head, turning both palms upward. So? She did it. Ayisha blew it up? Robbie blurted. She really did? She caused that? According to Taharka, she did exactly that, Jack said. What a fascinating tale. I have to meet this woman with her extraordinary abilities, Esmeralda mused. You know I get lonely for the company of other women, Jack. When she is feeling up to receiving visitors, you must introduce us, and I'll invite her to have dinner, just the two of us, for some woman talk. Jack hadn't expected this. The conversation had taken a decidedly awkward turn. He glanced at Robbie, who was smiling at him, obviously enjoying his discomfort. Jack drummed his fingers on the tabletop for a moment, thinking, then cleared his throat. Well, you see, remember I said she could create illusions? She raised an eyebrow inquiringly. Yes? What are you trying to say, Jack? Jack groped for words. Anything he said at this point would come out wrong. Robbie took the bull by the horns. He's trying to say that Princess Ayisha turned out not to be old and ugly, Lady Esmeralda, he said. She's young and very pretty, but until recently we had no idea how she really looked because she disguises herself using magic. The lady pirate burst out laughing. Oh, now I know why my darling Jack was at a most unusual loss for words. She smiled at the captain fondly. Only you, Jack, only you could take an ugly old woman on a rescue mission and be assured that she would, when all is said and done, turn out to be neither ugly nor old. Jack cleared his throat, feeling heat creep up his face. He shrugged. Once Robbie realized that Esmeralda wasn't angry, he too began laughing. They laughed until they were breathless, while Jack sat there trying to smile. Finally, the two of them sputtered down into occasional giggles. I didn't know about Ayisha blowing up Borya's ship until just now, Lady Esmeralda, Robbie added, so I'm partly laughing at myself. You see, I thought the powder magazine exploding was a genuine miracle sent by our Lord because I prayed for one. Oh, muchacho, she said, I understand. The young first mate shook his head, ruefully. Lady Esmeralda, you should have seen Jack's expression last night before he knew about Ayisha, when I told him it was the power of prayer that had caused the explosion and saved us. Robbie twirled his wine glass, but shook his head when she raised the bottle to offer a refill. Jack, however, took one. Robbie shrugged. Though I still prefer to believe the Lord does work in mysterious ways, and that he sent Ayisha to us, and gave her the ability to work magic. He finished the last of his wine. So really, there was only one miracle then, not two. There's such a thing as coincidence, mate, Jack said. True, Esmeralda said, fiddling with her wineglass. Please, Jack, allow me just the one miracle. And it was a miracle that you happened to be near Great Shabako and could see the smoke cloud from the explosion and came to investigate, Lady Esmeralda, Robbie said. Esmeralda hesitated. Robbie, muchacho, I too believe in miracles and prayer. I went to a convent school, after all. She smiled faintly. But alas, it was neither a miracle nor a coincidence I was on the eastern side of Great Shabako Island last night. Jack frowned. What brought you there, then? There is a bit of a story to it, she said. You know that I have been looking for de Vipere ever since he killed my grandfather. 3 years I have searched, and still that Pharaoh eludes me. Her hand clenched on the tabletop, but her voice was controlled. Jack nodded, but he didn't meet her eyes, instead picking on an imaginary spot on his new waistcoat. I know, Esmeralda. He salved his guilt about not being honest with her about using Tiadama's compass to find Christophe by recalling his vow to settle the score between himself and the rogue captain, as soon as he had the third bracelet. Esmeralda sighed, relaxing her hand, then continued. Every time I put in at a harbor to sell prizes I've taken, I make contact with a person in that port who knows things. You know the type I mean, I'm sure. I offer to pay these informants for information about the whereabouts of rogue pirates. I did not distinguish between those two cucarachas. I figured that if I captured Borya, I could convince him to tell me anything he knew about Christophe's whereabouts fairly quickly. After all, he gave up his Confederates 5 years ago without any physical persuasion. You remember, Jack. I do, he confirmed. This past spring, one of my informants told me the rogue pirate who sailed a sloop, Borya, in other words, was doing a search of his own. Borya offered to pay anyone who could report the whereabouts of a certain Captain Jack Sparrow, a merchant captain who was sailing an East Indiaman for the East India Trading Company. Jack and Robbie exchanged a glance. In a way, it's flattering, Jack said, with a faint smile. Captain Jack Sparrow. My fame is spreading. Or your infamy, Robbie suggested. It's actually reassuring, though, Jack added, thinking aloud. For years I've worried about Teague getting word that I was alive and hunting me down so he could hang me from Troubadour's yardarm. But if Borya could find out I'm alive, so could Teague. So he either hasn't bothered to inquire, or he knows and doesn't care to pursue the matter. So I don't need to worry about getting nabbed by his henchmen. I don't believe that Teague would order you hunted down so he could execute you, Esmeralda said. I've told you this before. As you English say, sangre is thicker than agua. You don't know him the way I do, love, Jack said. But all that's beside the point, which is that Borya was keeping tabs on me. It's unlikely he did that because he missed my charming self. So why was he paying for information about me? My guess is that Borya wanted revenge, Esmeralda said. You were the one that unmasked him as a rogue, after all. The little butcher was not in the Northwest Providence Channel by coincidence, Jack. He knew you had returned. I spoke to an informant of mine, who was also an informant of Borya's. From what he told me, Borya discovered you were back. Then he sailed north to one of the most used routes in the Triangle, and waited there to attack you. How did you happen to discover all this, love? Jack asked. She poured herself another glass of wine and took a sip. 2 weeks ago I had some business in Kemp's Bay on Andros. While I was there, Giles sought me out. He's not a Frenchman. He's part Mayan from Yucatan, part African, and part... She snapped her fingers as she hunted for the English word. Stoat, is that what you called the animal in your country? A slinking, long little creature, one that robs nests and hen houses? Weasel, Robbie supplied. Ah, yes. At any rate, he is sly and will sell his own grandmother for a peso, but at heart he is a coward. He owns a boat, and he and his boat are available for hire to sail passengers between the islands. Giles is a man that knows many people in many places. Jack held out his wineglass, and she refilled it, then continued. A week ago, Giles told me he had been paid 20 pesos by Borya for passing along the news that a certain Captain Jack Sparrow had recently brought a cargo to Antigua, then departed, heading north, most probably starting on the next leg of the triangle. Jack and Robbie exchanged glances. Esmeralda smiled faintly. Giles was very eager to tell me everything he told Borya, plus everything he had observed about Borya. He also made a point of telling me he charged me only half as much as Borya paid him for twice the information. Why would he do that? Jack wondered. Esmeralda gave him a look. Why do you think, Jack? Giles wants me. Oh, he said. Sorry, I'm a bit slow, darling. Got hit on the head yesterday, if you recall. She smiled and added, I could tell that Giles was holding something back, so I leaked a few tears and confessed to him that you were actually my beloved cousin, by way of an ancestor who survived the wreck of the Armada and married an Englishwoman. Giles was very sympathetic. He then told me, for free, that he'd spotted Coldunya a few days later near the Northwest Providence Channel. So you decided to go hunting for Borya yourself, Robbie said. Si, muchacho. I headed northwest from Andros to follow the channel, then left it and swung east past Grand Bahama, past Little Abaco, then east past the northern tip of Great Abaco. I posted a lookout constantly. She smiled faintly. It paid off, actually. I took a very nice schooner that was carrying fabric bound for Charleston, and then a flute loaded with tea and spices. So my crew had no complaint. And then you headed south down the deep-water channel that lies on the eastern side of Great Abaco, Jack guessed. Precisely. I had given up my search. I was perhaps 4 miles past Hole in the Wall on Great Abaco when my lookout saw the smoke of the explosion to the northwest, the clouds still yellow that high up from the last rays of the sun. When I heard about big smoke clouds, I thought perhaps Borya had taken some unfortunate vessel, then fired her to hide the evidence. Lately, both rogue pirates have been burning the ships they take, so I took a sighting on the cloud and set my course by it. She shrugged and sipped more wine. So as you can see, it was not a miracle that I was there. I had actually been out hunting for Borya. Actually, I'd say it was likely a candidate to be a miracle as I'd ever encountered, love, Jack said, surprising himself, as well as both of his listeners. I mean, think about it. What are the chances that you would be close enough to sight the evidence of the explosion if you'd been 5 miles farther along your course or gone 5 miles less? He shrugged. Esmeralda and Robbie looked to each other and smiled conspiratorially. Before they left Venganza, Esmeralda conducted Jack and Robbie on a tour of her ship. She was rightly proud of her vessel. Her crew might be pirates, but the frigate was as well maintained as she had been back in her days as part of the Royal Navy. "She's the perfect pirate ship, love," Jack said as they stood on the bow, "a fit vessel for the pirate lord of the Caribbean." "If she were properly armed, your Wicked Wench could be every bit as good as Venganza, Jack." "Oh, we know that," Robbie said. "We both said that first time we laid eyes on her." Jack shot his first mate a quelling glance. Esmeralda's eyes gleamed. "You should think about joining me, Jack," she urged. "Oh, I realize you couldn't do it immediately. You're going to need to put her in a big shipyard to get the wench seaworthy. But after she's professionally repaired, we could meet somewhere safe for both of us, say Port Royal. Then you and Robbie can pay off your merchant crew. I'll lend you the dinero. Then I can send you enough of my men aboard so you can sail the Tortuga and pick up a pirate crew. Think of it, Jack. The two of us, we've been unbeatable." "But I'm still under sentence of death from the Brethren," Jack pointed out. "Ah, but you can redeem yourself by dispatching the rogues you freed," Esmeralda said. "Borya is dead, so half the task is already accomplished. Our first venture together will be to hunt down Christophe. I want the satisfaction of killing him myself, but I'll make sure you can take the credit for doing it, Jack. That way you'd, she snapped her fingers, "expiate your crime. With both rogues dead and me to vouch for you, the pirate lords will cancel your sentence. You could go back on the account. We could sail together." Jack drew a deep breath. "It's tempting, love," he said, "but I don't think I'm ready to go back to waking up in a cold sweat after dreaming about nooses." The spark in Esmeralda's eyes vanished. She sighed, then nodded. "I understand." She hesitated, glancing at Robbie, who took the hint and wandered off to the other side of the bow, out of earshot. "At least we can be together for more than one day this time. Shall I row over tonight, toward the end of the middle watch?" Jack smiled. "I'd be miserable and lonely and wouldn't get a wink of sleep if you didn't, mi corazon." So the next day, Jack introduces Ayisha to Esmeralda, and immediately she becomes jealous. She can tell that Jack and Esmeralda are lovers, and she goes back to her bunk below deck, essentially to brood. Taharka and Shabako try to cheer her up, but it's no use. Eventually, Jack comes down to check on her after hearing she was sick. She tells him she is not sick, and that she is just tired, but she notices he looks distraught, and he tells her it's his fault she feels this way, because she almost died trying to save him and his crew from Borya. Jack thanks her from the bottom of his heart, and he kisses her not too long after. Jack thinks he might have overstepped a bit, and apologizes, but Ayisha then asks him why he did it in the first place. He tells her that he did it because 1, she is pretty, and 2, he shouldn't have done it because she is a princess, and 3, if she didn't like what he'd done, she could slap him. So Ayisha slaps him, but she simply pats his cheek. Jack then tells her that Esmeralda has invited her over for dinner on Venganza, so she accepts the invitation. Later that night, Ayisha goes aboard Venganza, and before dinner is served, Esmeralda tells her they raided a ship recently carrying a cargo of fabric, so she lets Ayisha pick out as much as she wants. After this, dinner is served, and the two of them get to know each other better. "You are most welcome, Ayisha. Is that your real name, by the way?" No. I gave a false name when I was taken. I was afraid the slavers would try to make my people pay an exorbitant ransom." "Is Esmeralda your real name?" "It is, actually, although Spanish names, particularly for the nobility, tend to be very long. One can grow tired just trying to say them all in one breath." They laughed. Esmeralda poured herself some more wine, then topped off the princess's glass. Ayisha picked up an almond, then put it back on her plate. "So how long have you known Captain Sparrow?" she asked, trying to make the question casual. Esmeralda smiled, and Ayisha had the feeling that she hadn't fooled the Spanish pirate for a moment. "I've known him off and on for 5 years. We actually met as children briefly. That did not go well. I beat him up, I fear." Ayisha gasped, then nearly snorted with laughter. She managed to turn it into a giggle. "You didn't!" "I did. He was 9, and I had just turned 15, so I had an advantage of both height and weight at that time." "He's an interesting man," the princess said. "A gross understatement, my dear. Jack is an absolutely fascinating man. You're unlikely to meet anyone else like him." Ayisha nodded. "He has a lot of faults," she ventured. "He drinks too much." "Another understatement. But he's always been like that ever since I knew him. Lots of rum, lots of women. That's Jack for you." "He has awful taste. That cabin." Esmeralda rolled her eyes. Both women burst out laughing. The lady pirate refilled both their glasses. "My dear, Jack is absolutely riddled with faults. There are times when I've thought seriously of shooting him the next time I see him. But I never do." "What fault do you dislike the most about him?" Ayisha asked, after taking a sip. Esmeralda nibbled her lower lip. There are so many. Let me think for a moment. She sipped wine, then said, I suppose I would have to say the fact that I can't trust him. I would never make myself vulnerable by counting on him to keep his word. You don't trust him? Ayisha was surprised. She trusted Jack. Was she wrong to do so? No, I don't. Oh, you can count on him in certain situations. If I had to fight a ship-to-ship battle against 3 or 4 adversaries, I would want Jack as the captain of the ship that was fighting alongside me. If I had to invade a fortress and I wanted to make sure I'd get out alive, I'd have him at my side. If sword-wielding enemies surrounded me, I'd want him at my back. As long as Jack's own precious hide is at risk, you can ask for no better comrade in battle. He's a clever and experienced fighter when he's cornered. That maneuver he tried with Borya verged on brilliance, for example. Except it didn't work. True, but if it had, it would have been brilliant. So in what instances would you not trust him? If he asked me to lend him money, and I gave it to him, I'd do so knowing I'd never see it again. He promised to pay it back, and he'd mean it, but he'd never do it. I wouldn't give him valuable jewelry of mine and trust him to return it to me 6 months later. He'd likely get into some kind of scrape and have to sell or pawn it. He'd be sorry, but it would be gone. Esmeralda smiled a bit grimly. And if he ever asked me to marry him, I would refuse him. Ayisha's eyes widened. She'd wondered if the two were promised. Hearing that they weren't made her heart stutter. You would? Why? Because he's never going to show up at the altar. No woman is ever going to tie Jack Sparrow down in their home and hearth. He's not that kind of man. Ayisha nodded. That one definitely rang true. The sea is his woman. I don't think a flesh and blood one could ever replace it in his heart. Esmeralda gave the princess a glance of mingled surprise and respect. Very sagely put, Ayisha, and true as true can be. The lady pirate poured more wine. They sipped in silence for several minutes. Finally, the princess asked quietly, Have you ever wished he would ask you to marry him? I did for a while when I first knew him. Then I realized that if by some chance I dragged him to the altar, he wouldn't stay. Or if somehow I forced him to stay, he wouldn't be Jack anymore. Who wants a sparrow with broken wings? Ayisha giggled. That was clever, Esmeralda, as well as sage. It was, wasn't it? The Spanish pirate giggled in turn. The princess looked over at her companion. But you're in love with him, Esmeralda, aren't you? How could I not be? Jack charms every woman he encounters. He can't seem to help it. He does care for me in return, I know he does. She sipped her wine. But I know pirates, so I don't expect more than he can give. True pirates aren't like other men. But Jack isn't a pirate. He was. I had figured that out, Ayisha said, but he's not anymore. Don't you believe that for a second, Ayisha. Jack will always be a pirate. When he says he's not one, it's like... Esmeralda thought for a moment. It's like someone who makes a dress out of muslin and then convinces herself it's silk. From a sufficient distance, you might not be able to tell, but the moment you got up close, you'd realize the truth, and all the while she'd be telling you the dress was silk. I see what you mean, Ayisha said. I haven't known Jack as long as you, Esmeralda, and I acknowledge that you are right in many things, but someone I respect said that Jack is a good man. I think he was right. Even Jack may not know it, but I believe he is. My grandfather who raised me said something similar, Esmeralda murmured, thoughtfully. Perhaps I've become a bit cynical. She sipped her wine. We've been talking about Jack's faults, but he does have some good qualities. Aside from being a good man to have at your back in a fight, what are they? He's a good captain. Knows ships, knows the sea. Esmeralda thought for a moment. He's funny. He always makes me laugh. That's probably what saved him from getting shot. She poured more wine for both of them. And last but not least, Jack certainly knows how to show a woman a good time. A really good time. Ayisha frowned, puzzled. What do you mean? I've never heard that phrase before. Esmeralda looked away and cleared her throat. She didn't reply, then Ayisha saw color rising in her cheeks. Ayisha felt herself color too. Oh, she said in a small voice. That. Esmeralda glanced at the princess's expression, then finished her wine. Yes, that, she said finally. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you hadn't... Ayisha shook her head. No, she said, softly and a little sadly. Esmeralda had spilled her wine. She traced circles in the blood-red liquid with her forefinger. You'll make the right decision, she said. Or rather, the decision that's right for you. You'll know if, or when, it's the right time. Ayisha nodded silently. So after this, Ayisha makes her way back to the Wicked Wench, and Jack sees both her and Esmeralda rowed back over, and they are both laughing and giggling. He is incredibly confused by all this, and asks what is going on. They reply nothing, and he clearly can tell they are both tipsy. He tells them this, and they both start laughing again, and Ayisha then bids goodbye to Esmeralda, and she goes below deck to her bunk. He tries to ask Ayisha what they were doing over there, but she doesn't say. He then tries to question Esmeralda, who went into his cabin, but by the time he made it in there, she was already asleep. And I love Jack's thoughts here. There are things man was never meant to know, he decided, and went to bed himself. The next morning, Esmeralda kisses Jack goodbye before heading back to Venganza. For 2 days, Venganza escorts the wench, and then Jack will be on his own. The wench then stops in Savannah to make repairs, and Jack reports to the EITC office there. After 10 days of repairs, the wench sets out again, heading due north to the current location of La Vipere. He has Ayisha make 2 flags out of the silk he bought in Savannah, one being the Jolly Roger, and the other one being the same but with inverted colors for surrender. 50 miles south of Bermuda, Jack finds La Vipere. He raises the Jolly Roger to get Christophe's attention, and then goes out into a rowboat where he raises the second inverted flag. He then rows out to La Vipere, and once he is in shouting range, he calls for Christophe to join him for parley. The crew at first ask Jack to come aboard, but Jack knows better. He tells the crew for Christophe to join him in a boat, unarmed. Jack then tells them he is also unarmed, but that is a lie. He obviously couldn't trust Christophe, so he came prepared with a pistol just in case. But let's see what happens here. Jack counted seconds in his head. He'd reached 240 when he heard the splash of the boat being lowered. A faint smile touched his mouth, but he didn't even bother to look up at his erstwhile friend as he rowed over. "Bonjour, mon ami," Christophe said, as he reached Jack's boat and shipped his oars. "Congratulations. They tell me you are now captain of that lovely big ship over there. It is a pleasure to see you doing so well. I must say that is a very nice coat, Jack's." Jack looked up and had to control his reaction. He knew Christophe was almost 40 now, but he was startled by what a difference a mere 5 years had made. Christophe's features were still handsome, but it was as though some artist had wiped a cloth over them, blurring them a bit. He was still clean-shaven, but there were pouches beneath his eyes that hadn't been there before, and a softness below his chin and jawline that was new. His nose looked redder, as though he'd been drinking more. Jack cleared his throat. He did not respond to Christophe's friendly greeting, or the hand the man was holding out. "Christophe, I know you've been searching for Zerzura to no purpose, and now you know that it takes not 1 but 3 talismans to open the door to the labyrinth." Jack paused. "I'm the answer to your prayers, Christophe. I can get us to Zerzura, and then I can get us into the labyrinth. I have made contact with a native Zerzuran who has agreed to serve as our guide. What Captain Ward wrote turns out to be true. The labyrinth really is a maze, and is filled with monsters and traps for the unwary, both real and illusion. My guide can get us through the heart. All that's required for you to get in on this venture is that you still have the Pharaoh's bracelet, and that you must agree to the conditions I set. Do you still have the bracelet?" "Yes, Jax, I still have it," the rogue pirate said. "But Jax, cannot we go to my cabin and discuss this? Here we are, sitting in boats in the water. That is not the way friends talk. Christophe, get this straight. This time around it's my way or no way. Savvy?" "I confess I am surprised to see you, Jax. Borya told me he had discovered that you were alive. A friendly warning, Jax. He is hunting for you, and he means you no harm." Jack shrugged. "I'm not afraid of Borya. Do you agree to my conditions?" Christophe couldn't conceal his surprise at Jack's dismissal of the Russian rogue pirate's enmity, but after a moment he shrugged, then said, "It is only fair that we be equal partners in such a venture, Jax. Jack interrupted the rogue pirate by picking up his oars. "Very well, Christophe. If you don't want to do things my way on this venture, I'm leaving. I don't have time to play games. Farewell." He unshipped his oars and took a stroke. "Stop, Jax!" Christophe shouted. Jack halted, then shipped his oars again, and waited. In a moment, Christophe had pulled up beside him. Jack looked at him. "Very well," said Christophe. "I will agree to your conditions. I have already told you I have the bracelet. What else do you want?" Jack ticked off his requirements on his fingers as he spoke. 1. Your bracelet stays on Kerma when you leave. 2. You are the only person aboard your ship who is permitted to leave your ship once we reach Zerzura. I have to keep the goodwill of my native guide, so I am not to have any of your cutthroats going into the city and harming the citizens. To ensure that your men behave and don't try to break our agreement, I plan to post armed men on my vessel to watch yours all the time. Savvy?" Christophe sat quietly listening. 3. You don't get bearings for how to get to Kerma. I know how to get there, so instead you will follow me there. Should a storm separate us, we'll meet in St. Iago in the Cape Verdes. If I get there before you do, I will wait for 10 days. If you're not there by then, I'll take my chances at blowing the door open with powder. 4. Neither you nor your crew is to come aboard my vessel for any reason, ever. Those are my conditions. If you abide by them, you'll get your chance in the labyrinth to get as much as you can carry. I'll give you 3 minutes to decide whether you want in on this under my terms." Jack looked away from the rogue pirate and casually glanced under his seat. There was a bottle of rum there. Picking it up, he opened it, and had raised it halfway to his mouth when Christophe said brusquely, "Yes, I accept those terms." Jack nodded, then recorked the rum. "Very well. I'll give you half an hour to get your ship ready to sail east. Then I'm setting out. I'll see you in the harbor of Zerzura." Unshipping his oars, Jack began rowing back toward the Wicked Wench, without a backward glance. So after Jack makes his deal with Christophe, they begin to sail towards Zerzura finally. Ayisha spends this time sewing clothes with the fabric from Esmeralda. She also notices a certain hunger in Jack's eyes when he looks at her. She knew that very soon Ayisha would be no more, and only Amaniris would remain. She walks up to Jack on the bow, asking him how long until they reach Zerzura. He tells her around 10 to 12 days, and she realizes that if she's going to make her move, now is the time. So that night, she slips out of her bunk and makes her way to Jack's cabin. Jack stirs immediately and asks why she is here, and she tells him she is here because she wants to be. She touches his shoulder, and then Jack pulls her into his bunk, where they spend the rest of the night together. And that is the end of Chapter 14 and the end of this episode. We are so close now, and next time we will be finishing The Price of Freedom by reading Chapter 15 to the end of the book. Fair warning, it will probably be the longest episode of the podcast yet. I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling it's going to be. Like, especially with the thing, the main event happening at the end of the book. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I have a feeling it's going to be a long episode. So we'll see what happens. But beside that, there's also a lot more incredible stuff to come. Zerzura and Christophe and all that stuff coming up. So I hope you join me next time for the episode that I've been waiting so long to talk about in full. You're not going to want to miss it, so please make sure you're here when it releases. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this episode and the whole Price of Freedom coverage so far. If you've been enjoying that, please consider leaving a rating or a review wherever you listen to the podcast. That helps a lot and makes me very grateful. I thank you so much for everyone who has listened to the podcast so far and everyone who has been enjoying this Price of Freedom journey. And it's been so much fun to do so far, and I cannot wait for next time. So I will see you all for the dramatic and emotional conclusion to The Price of Freedom and the discussion of the turning point in Jack Sparrow's life. I'll see you next time. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram and Threads at Podcast of the Caribbean, and over on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia over there, so make sure to check those platforms out. You can also buy merchandise for the podcast over on Dashery. Be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.